Cool. Thank you all for coming out, and thank you for joining us online. We have a bunch of you online as well. Just to let you know, we are recording right now, so anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. So please don't say anything you'll regret. My name is Dave Losey. I'm one of the organizers here for the Office 365 user group. We also have Dimitri back in the corner, Mike Dixon up front here, and Jeff, who couldn't make it tonight. Feel free to talk to any of us if you have any recommendations, input, feedback, any negative comments, reach out to Jeff. Yep. Last time we had Dave Feldman here, and we were talking about design and build your modern.
He was remote.
No. We had him remotely, but we greatly appreciated that, Dave. Thank you. That was Mike Dixon complaining about it.
I wasn't complaining. I thought it was awesome. That was our first remote presenter, and it actually went incredibly well.
Yeah.
So it was awesome. Thank you, Dave.
He's opened up the floodgates for us. So design and build your modern internet with communication sites. It says at the bottom, watch on YouTube. It's not on YouTube yet. I completely dropped the ball on this one. So it'll be on YouTube very soon, potentially tonight, depending on how my computer works. So it will be up on our YouTube channel. We have a great YouTube channel. We have the last year and a half, 2 years, maybe worth of sessions up there. So feel free to check that out for some of our past sessions. We want to run through some of the updates since we last met. Microsoft is constantly pushing updates to all their products, their Office 365 stack. So we like to try to highlight some of the key ones. I think there was maybe about 40 updates. We're not going to go over all of them. I think that takes like 5 or 6 of the big ones, I'm hoping. And we do monitor every single blog Microsoft has. They have 30 different Microsoft flows running on 30 different blogs that monitor everything they share. So we try to pick all the good ones out, of course. So first up, anybody using Power Apps? Cool, good. Hands keep going up. That number just keeps climbing. So there were 2 nice announcements. You can do responsive now in Power Apps. So you can have your Power App respond to the width and the size of your screen, which is a big plus. Previously, you had to make a phone version, then a desktop version, and then manage two different copies. Now you can have fun with a single version. They've also made some improvements around performance, this idea of delegation. Previously, when you started doing filters and things like that with certain data sources, it would only pull back 500 items and filter it locally in Power Apps. Now it's going to send that filter request to the data source. So the data source will do all that heavy lifting of filtering and return the data that you're looking for. So we should start seeing some pretty good performance boosts there. Anybody using 3D content? I haven't explored this yet. I was hoping somebody would say, yeah, I'm using it all the time because I would talk to you about it, but none of you are using it, which is great. I'll be exploring this. I'm curious to see what's the point. I guess maybe I'm just not in the right industry for 3D content. I don't know who would be doing that, but anyway, there are updates, there are guidelines. This link has a PDF download of steps and how to get started and all that stuff, if you're interested. Microsoft released this lookbook, SharePoint lookbook, which is a public site of just all this cool design stuff you can do with SharePoint modern sites. They provide everything. So these are samples, beautiful images, designs, and all that. And you can download stuff and install it into your own SharePoint. So it's to give you inspiration for your own SharePoint sites. What this announcement's about is that you can actually install their sample sites into your sites, into your tenant. So there is now a package that you can install and deploy these beautiful sites into your own tenant and play with it real time. No pretty image on this one. New ways to manage team apps and integrations. So there's new administration screens around apps and customizations in your integrations. Something to be aware of if you're administering teams in your organization. This came out, I believe, last week. How many of you are using Teams? Like real-time Teams, not like one group using Teams, but people really using Teams? 1, 2. And how many of you are piloting Teams, playing with Teams? Okay, cool.
We're rolling it out.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I didn't mean to downplay that. No, that's all. Live events is now generally available. So this was in preview for a while. Now you can stream live events from Teams, Yammer, and Stream. We will probably be shifting gears from a normal Teams meeting to using live streams for this user group. So we'll be able to try that firsthand. But now it's generally available, so we should all have access to that.
There's a few more features we're waiting for before we do that.
Yeah. Multi-geo, they announced it a while back that it was coming, and now it's general available as well. So SharePoint and Office 365 groups, you can now have multi-geo, so you can host those sites all around the planet now, which is good for those of you who live outside the U.S. or work outside the U.S.
I think there's some restrictions on size.
Oh, good.
So just to, with regard to number of users, I think you have to have a minimum number of users.
Okay.
Just as a
Awesome
detail.
Thank you, Scott. Scott works for Microsoft, so don't say anything bad about Microsoft. Did I skip too far? No, I didn't. Okay, cool. So huge thanks to Turn Digital for sponsoring us. They are our go-to sponsor. And I think we're ready for the main event. Real World Office 365 External Collaboration by Scott.
Nice.
Cool. Come on up. There you go.
Great. So welcome everybody. My name is Scott McFadden. I'm an infrastructure architect on the Microsoft Technology Center team here in Boston. And I get the opportunity to meet with lots of customers that have been moving into Office 365 and Azure. I work a lot very closely with our modern workplace teams. So Chris Portlake and Paul Summers are on my team locally here, helping a lot of customers optimize their use of Office 365, onboard in Office 365, and really kind of drive that. A lot of the sessions that I work on with customers is around security, a lot of security aspects around Office 365. My background is around around infrastructure, security, identity, and networking. I've been in the MTC for about 6 years, and prior to the MTC, I worked within our financial services vertical, in which for about 7, 8 years, in which about 2012, one of my FinServ customers wanted to actually go see an Azure data center in Chicago, and we went out and took a look at it, and I decided I definitely want to change my job and just focus on helping customers basically migrate and move to using Azure cloud services. So over the last 6 years, kind of been learning through that journey with a lot of customers that come into the MTC. And for the presentation today is really going to share some of the insights, some of the challenges with regard to external collaboration and sharing that we've seen with some of those customers in relation to Office 365. A lot of what I focus on is around some of the identity controls. So probably a little bit more heavy in something called Azure Active Directory B2B under the covers. Are you guys, so hands up if you have a lot of experience with Azure Active Directory B2B today. Just 1, 2, a few folks that kind of know what it is. Raise your hands on Azure Active Directory. Good handle on Azure Active Directory, which obviously is an underpinning of Office 365, runs all the different things. Well, I'm gonna try to highlight the relationships and where we're seeing a lot of customers try to when talking about doing some external sharing and collaboration. What are some of the common things that are coming up, along with some of the innovation that we're investing in from making this a really great story all up. So I'll get into it. So I'm going to start off with just the concept of sharing. Okay, just to throw it out with regard to I have 3 children, 8, 6, and 1, and I'm teaching sharing a lot. The whole concept of sharing, and within Office 365, sharing, and you guys are the experts around sharing internally within what we call your tenant, and your tenant is typically an Azure Active Directory instance, and then you have your M365 Office 365 set of services that are tied to that tenant. You get lots of great collaboration and sharing internally. But then when we talk about sharing externally, then you start kind of scoping out ways and methods that you're going to take that sensitive content and all that data that's restricted within your own like Office 365 environment and start sharing that with others. And what does that experience look like? If I go back to prior to the cloud, what a lot of customers, including Microsoft, were creating extranets. So building a lot of big infrastructure with regard to creating Active Directory, dedicated Active Directory infrastructure, and then creating a SharePoint infrastructure that would tie into this secondary Active Directory infrastructure, and then you'd have to get an ID in order to log in and do this extranet sharing. Extremely painful. We lived through that for a number of years. Raise your hands if you've lived through a extranet, a SharePoint extranet back prior to the cloud. Any feedback? Was that an awesome experience? Right? That's all gone. Now sharing we're 2019, sharing should be cool and dynamic, right? Like so easy. You just click, you say, I trust you, and it just happens naturally, right? Yes, no? Anybody kind of have a feeling? So we're going to talk about kind of that sharing mode. I'm going to throw up here a picture. When we talk about sharing, right, these days, can anybody tell me what that is a picture of? Just kind of seeing this picture and kind of explain what this is saying.
Or the outside of this building.
But so yeah, so it's our screen. This is my login screen for my demo environment that's customized, so you kind of know that this is when I talk tenant, it's our Azure AD, and I'm trying to when you're going to communicate with my tenant or my company, I want to have some branding, so you know that you see a familiar picture. What about this ugly little block saying wanting you to accept something? Anybody seen this number of times? Raise your hand, right? You've seen that before? So what this is a picture of is basically what you need to do to accept that you want to collaborate externally outside of your company. This is an example of prepping for this last night. I invited my personal Yahoo account to go and say, hey, I want to start sharing. I want to start doing Teams. I want to start sharing and then collaborating with you. This is also an example of a person that's not in Office 365. So in this case, this is a user that doesn't have any type of Office 365 infrastructure. Yahoo is one that I could kind of grab as an example. In terms of some new capabilities that we recently turned on, we can share with, there's really great capabilities when a customer or partner already has Office 365, because a lot of that is already in place. But we're also planning for that if the customer doesn't have Office 365 and doesn't have Azure AD, making it super easy to still enable collaboration in a secure manner. So that's kind of highlighting that. But the other key piece here is basically an agreement that when you accept this, you're accepting that I'm going to be able to get some PII information from you in order to maintain some ability to collaborate with you. So I'm going to ask basically for this user, I'm going to be able to read their name, their email address, maybe photo. So there's some basic PII information that enables me to keep track of you. Also, it's an aspect of authenticating you. So this is kind of the invite that you're going to have to accept if you're getting a B2B invite to potentially collaborate with SharePoint. If it's going to be a SharePoint collab, maybe Teams. We talked to Office 365 groups. When you're starting to expand and bring someone in, you may, depending on your security controls, actually require folks to click and accept this message. So a lot of the talk that I'm going to walk through today is going to be around things that you want to plan for whether it's your own organization, around enabling external collaboration, making it easy. What are the things to think about around when you get folks to accept and then be able to have access to the sensitive information or collaboration that you want them to have access to? But then it's a question of how long do you want them? A couple of questions you have to say, okay, I want to collaborate with you. You're a consultant. 30 days, going to be good. Then after 30 days, you're gone. But does that go away? Like, do you want to keep sharing and collaborating after a certain period? And how do you manage saying a lot of customers are paranoid going, oh, well, yeah, I invited Scott, a week ago, and we're done. We don't work together anymore. Who's going back to clean up the fact that you have some external sharing going on at the end of the day? Do you audit? Do you care about auditing? Who are your guests? Who are all the people you're sharing with? Can you get insights to that? Well, we've been hard at work trying to give customers better visibility to the tool set. So I'm going to kind of just walk through a life cycle of, and these are a lot of things that come up in the MTC. Customers wanting to share, enabling a safe, secure way to share, and then having that visibility of who you're sharing with, why, how, when, and then having some type of automated capabilities where you can kind of manage those. A lot of new innovation has been coming up over the years in developing a great capability. So behind the scenes, like I want to for this group, I was thinking David was highlighting, asking who's using Teams today, and there's a few hands raised. This is a picture that was or an architecture that was shared at the last Ignite that just summarizes some of the security that goes into basically allowing access to Teams. So you have here on the bottom right-hand corner is basically providing access to Microsoft Teams that ultimately have application tabs, bots. Now Teams, one of the aspects of Teams is it actually relies on Office 365 groups to function. Potentially, you can also basically leverage and integrate with SharePoint because Teams automatically give access to that. With Office 365 groups, there's basically security settings that you can allow, basically saying, will you allow external collaboration, or is this an internal only? So there's one basically one key hook that you enable with regard to who's allowed to actually create new Office 365 teams, and then if you are able to create an Office 365 team, is that Office 365 team going to allow external users to collaborate? And there's a key dependency on how that works. If that Office 365 group actually allows guest authentication, well, then that allows basically you to bring in those users and then allow folks to start to collaborate. So it kind of is a great way to say, think around when you're thinking about guest access to be able to collaborate on Teams. Underlying Teams is an Office 365 security group. Underlying that is a lot of the capabilities around guest access and B2B that allow you to kind of control and identify who can collaborate with you. So in the context of Teams, I thought that would be like an important kind of aspect around how this type of stuff works. B2B basics, only a couple of people kind of raised their hands on being familiar with B2B. So basically, it's an idea of inviting another directory outside of your own tenant and Azure Active Directory, so you can collaborate with them. There's two parts to that. One is the invitation. So you would get an invitation that's going to prompt you to basically authenticate based on who you are through the email that you were invited to, and then you actually have to have a redemption. So the redemption is actually once you click that accept, the accept actually makes you as a redeemed invite from whoever's inviting you, and then you have the ability to basically now start to use Teams or wherever they're allowing you to access data. That's in play. Now the key things that are allowed now is that you can audit and track within your tenant who's been invited, open invites that haven't been redeemed, and actual redemption. So you can actually audit and through the Microsoft Graph, do a quick lookup and say, out of my environment, I've got X amount of invites that have gone out as guest users, and percentage of those have actually been redeemed. You may be wanting to clean up some of the invites that are 6 months old, right? And then nobody ever redeemed. So you just kind of like there's a kind of a quality or a cleanup around if you actually care about who's collaborating with your company and who's potentially going to have access to your sensitive data. We're giving you visibility to those. We have there's a great link in there that is a link to the B2B mechanics. If everybody familiar with mechanics? No. So mechanics is like a Channel 9 IT Pro show that walks through their great 5 or 10 minute videos that basically run through and kind of the whole concept of the technology. So it's there for you to kind of reference as needed if you want a little bit more detail around B2B. But ultimately, how B2B works is based on Azure Active Directory. So B2B is part of Azure Active Directory. It's core to the core service. If you're a customer of Azure Active Directory, you automatically get B2B. There's no special pricing or licensing that I'm aware of. I'm not the licensing expert, but in general, it's you don't need any specialized P1 or P2 kind of licenses to use it. And underlying it, it basically goes across when we're trying to share across different services. We can use the B2B platform to enable collaboration externally with others through either SharePoint, online, office groups, as I mentioned, that support Teams. We also will use that to access a Microsoft service. So when you get into Azure, you can also get into scenarios around, I heard folks talk about Power Apps and things like that. You have the ability to actually authenticate like a Power Apps custom application to a guest user potentially. I haven't tried it out, but these are things that we do look at this to be an extensible strategy that would be beyond just Office 365 groups and SharePoint, and then also SaaS applications. So what you can do is if you have any type of single sign-on already for different applications, you have to bring in a partner or a contractor, and you want to provide them to a SaaS app like ServiceNow, you could actually invite them and then as a guest, and then associate that ServiceNow access to that user, and then you could also kind of share and even non-Microsoft applications securely. The other aspects up here is once that's in place, you can actually, different applications like SharePoint have specific knobs and security settings that you can control that go in much granular fashion around how you want to actually allow security, control security. And I'm going to highlight some of those controls that we go through that. But one of the things that this kind of from a storyline that a lot of customers that come in, and I have to I ask them, I go, what's your comfort level with one, Azure Active Directory? They go, yeah, we're all pretty good. And then I ask, well, what about our B2B service and guest users and external sharing? A lot of people, I don't know. It's kind of new. I don't really understand it. So one of the things I typically do is I go, well, if you have the rights, can we go into your Azure AD control panel? So we'll go in here, is kind of highlighting my Azure Active Directory user settings. And I say, there's a button in there that says external collaboration settings. Can we take a look? And we go through this process of looking at some really critical settings. So you go down this list. Is anybody really familiar with this list? This is we have one person.
I had a question about that actually. Yeah. I was going to ask you, I think there are some inherent differences in the permissions you get as a B2B user from what you get as a regular user.
Yes.
So, yeah, I was just curious what those differences are.
So,
like, what does limited mean in that first option?
So guest users are permissions are limited. They're treated as a different type. So that from a user type inside Azure AD, you have a member. So a member is basically your full user with a mailbox. When you're a guest, you're not treated as a full member, so you can't be assigned kind of like that full mailbox and things like that. You're actually, as I'm going to go through this, guest type accounts have the ability to basically I've separated out because of that type so that you can't do that. Now, what it's calling out here, guest users permissions are limited. You can flip the type because there are scenarios with M&A and some complex customers that actually have multiple Office 365 tenants, and they're trying to establish collaboration or shared access between those tenants, where you might get into that aspect where being a guest user may actually limit you. So you could actually turn it off and then say any guest that comes in could be a full member, and then you actually start to allocate full Office 365 controls and things like
And do
that.
that by domain?
By tenant.
In that M&A scenario. it's-
Yeah, that, we are in the midst of a lot, just a couple of, it's the big conglomerates, where you have a single conglomerate at like, you pick out like a GE, kind of at the highest level, and then they have acquisitions that have all these Office 365 tenants. Yeah, that can come into play across the board. We just recently learned with another customer, and they recently added this, that you can invite guest users, and then through PowerShell, actually add them to the global address list. So they show up as contacts from an M&A perspective. So this is where M&A, you kind of get into these aspects of being able to bring in these identities, but flipping between, when you say guest users permissions are limited, you really want to separate out the paranoia a lot of customers have is treating an external user like an employee. Now, in M&A scenario, you're bringing on you actually want to mask that, and you can kind of manage that through PowerShell and kind of flip them. But in general, especially majority of customers I see want to definitely tag external users as a separate group. Question?
So if that setting is set to no, so that they are not limited, what effect does that have on all of the per team settings that apply to guests? Does it then ignore those settings?
They're not guests anymore. They're full
They're not
members.
guests, they're now members.
Yes, the type. So it's just flipping a type. It's member or guest. It's just the type of account, and then the member can be assigned just like any type of member.
And is this a retroactive thing? Or is it just guests that are added once this setting is changed?
I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think it's retroactive. Once you turn it on, adding any guests from that point on are basically treated as members. I don't think it goes back, but I haven't tested that. But I'm pretty sure this is a setting where going forward, when you add guests, they're going to be automatically added as a member versus a guest if you turn that off. I'm not sure if it goes retroactively and turns all guests. Haven't tried that. That's a good question.
That's really
So
interesting.
I'm not sure.
Scott, do you know if there's a difference in Delve? Like guest users don't have the ability to browse the organization via Delve versus
Delve.
internal. I don't know if that's
Yes.
the case.
Oh yeah, they don't have any rights whatsoever. They have no rights.
Okay.
So and most member users do not have any rights because they don't have any licensing yet. So you don't have access to Delve or any service. You're just a member so far is only in Azure AD, and it doesn't necessarily mean they have any type of Office 365 services at all yet until you actually go into Office 365 admin center, or within the licensing area of Azure AD and actually assign licenses to those users. They don't have anything yet. But once you do, then you assign some of the Delve things.
Can you just clarify the difference between guest and external user, and is that difference the same in Office 365 versus Azure?
Guest and external user is the same, one and the same.
Okay.
So that's the terminology. It's the type of account is guest, and that is also representing an external user. So it's one and the same. And then your second part of your question was?
Well, if it's the same across like Azure as well as Office 365, because there's similar controls in Office 365 to what I'm seeing here, right?
Well, that's the key thing. Office 365 always goes back to this. So Office 365 is fully dependent on this on Azure AD always.
So the definitions are consistent.
Consistent, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of abstracted that from an identity perspective, a lot of folks come in and see like Azure AD as part of Office 365. They think that Azure AD is there just for Office 365, but it really isn't. Azure AD can just exist by itself, and then it's just support Azure or Intune, and Office 365 doesn't even have to ever exist. It's there for basically any Microsoft cloud service cannot run without some type of identity in Azure AD. So it's consistent. It's consistent across all services, no matter what.
So we're making the same change. So we got two different interfaces, Azure and Office 365, where we can make some of these changes. And you're saying that under the covers, that they're changing the same bits.
Exactly.
Okay.
See, I'm an infrastructure guy. I live here. I never hardly ever go into the Office 365 world. But I've been working with my colleagues who are Office 365 folks. we've kind of learned from each other, going, oh, I didn't know you go there. I've also learned about SharePoint has its own configurations that actually inside SharePoint actually does show this screen at some point. You guys probably seen this screen. So there's, we do have tracked away on the different admin consoles. I apologize for that, but people have different different expertise, right? And they live in different portals. So we kind of surface some of the same things in different ways. But the good news is it always comes back to a single identity layer in Azure AD, no matter what service that you're using. And then the other important part is that from a guest user perspective, as we go through these, you'll start to see admins and users in the guest inviter role can invite. Very confusing kind of component here, but it's just calling out the guest. There is a built-in guest inviter role that you can configure to allow certain people to only invite guests. So one of the things that you may want to do is if you go to portal.azure.com, and if you can log in and actually get to Azure AD, if you look into Azure Active Directory and look at users, and you'll see a plus on invite guest. Well, in this case, you're wide open that you can actually invite guests users can invite guests. But in this, you're starting to, if you're going to actually restrict that role, you're going to be able to, kind of control who you want to actually allow to invite guests, net new guests. And I'll walk you guys through kind of that level across the board. So members, the key one here is locking it down. Members can invite. You actually say no here. When I go up and say invite new guest, you would see basically a grayed out box. A lot of companies are being guided to turn this off, not to allow members to invite. And actually, there's a lot of work being done to automate, maybe either through Flow or a workflow, to establish a trusted group who's actually allowed to invite guest users and work through automating it and making it some type of service that security or the business unit has some type of capability to monitor this, because a lot of people are nervous. If you don't have this, anybody in your company can invite guest users across the board to anything. Anybody know what their settings are? Does anybody kind of raise your hands if you are locked down here? Do you know that you're locked, one person, two people are locked down? Anybody know that they're not locked down to invite guests?
Well, I was going to admit that.
So you also, when you say you're not integrated, why is this sensitive? I think one of the reasons, we had a customer in where I met David. We have some high profile customers, but I go to this screen and we look and I explain the screen, and these are production level groups. These are Fortune 1000 companies. They have no idea what these things do. So one of my go-tos is, let's go to the screen. Let's make sure you know what this is. And then usually they go, yeah, this is wide open. Oh, you wanted to talk to your security team and say you want to probably turn that off. The other aspect of this is really scary. Same Fortune 1000s actually have this. Unfortunately, this is a on by default, and you want to go back and change this. Guests can invite. So now I was the guest, I get invited. Now, if you have this on, this is the worst part of a party. Like, you invite someone to a party, and then they invite their 5 best friends to the party on your behalf. That goes really well. But from a security perspective, that's kind of really scary. It's going to call out questionable security, unless combined with other controls and things like that. But there's CIS benchmarks last year. You can look it up. Has some benchmarks for Azure. One of the top things that it says turn off right away. Turn off, allowing guests to invite guests. There's a purpose, but I don't know why they didn't kind of put that in there. So a couple things. The one thing that I highlighted for the Yahoo account is enable email one-time password for guests. So this is a scenario if you're inviting a guest that doesn't have Office 365, or we did gonna highlight. We recently enabled the ability to do SAML federation with larger providers like Gmail. So we do have a built-in capability to invite Gmail if you want to allow it. But if they don't have anything that's federated, you could send to one-time passcode to invite the guest if they don't have any type of kind of trusted directory service or anything like that. So that's in preview to make it much easier invite folks. But again, this is a security control. If you want to actually, turn that on and allow and trust, what it basically does is you invite the person, say it's a consultant that doesn't have a lot of, infrastructure, they say they have a Yahoo account or like a network solutions account, and then they'll get the invite, they'll click accept, but it'll send them a one-time passcode again to that email address, just to certify that it is definitely the person that you're inviting. They'll put the code in, they'll get a custom code, and then it'll trust that they've accepted the invite, and then that it is the person that you actually sent the invite to from an email perspective. So it's questionable if your security team is good with that or not, versus if they're an official Office 365 tenant, or potentially if you trust Gmail. Those are the different options. The other one.
Quick question.
Yeah.
You were alluding to enabling something like Google to be trusted. Is that like a trusted authorization source?
Yes, I'll show you where that is.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see
And
that.
they've recently changed the interface here to manage your relationships with different organizations, because this is expanding more and more. There's pressure to IT to collaborate, partnerships, M&As. I mean, it's just happening everywhere. So this is like kind of a new mode to collaborate and manage these things. So collaboration restrictions. This is something new that's been really hot with customers, is around restricting external sharing to only trusted domains. So this is a new mechanism to say, especially for M&As, so if you have a very security conscious customer who goes, I don't want to share with anybody, I don't trust anybody, but I just had an acquisition and I do trust this acquisition, and they have a separate M365 environment. Well, you can start to go, so this is kind of calling out most restricted, allow invitations only to the specified domains. So I can now select that and say, I will only share with these 3 or 4 Office 365 tenants. And then that makes me feel like I know who I only allow.
So there, if you do that, it's essentially whitelisting them. You actually list them all out,
Yep.
all those partners.
Yep.
Awesome.
So that's most restrictive, most overhead.
Yep.
Or you could say deny invitations to specified domains, which is you will trust everybody except your competitors. Or say you can, right, if you don't want to make sure that there's no external collaboration going on with, for us, Google or AWS, maybe they want to block that.
Yeah, then we came up with a scenario, is like, we're in the middle of trying to find a solution, actually, we're going with B2B. And if there was an instance with one of our partnership or something happened where information got leaked, how do we just shut that off with that one company? And that's where you would do that.
Yep, for that one company, you're like, I want to make sure there's none of this going on.
Something leaked, well, Facebook again, just got a hold of all my contacts and shared them to the world,
Yep.
So.
Yeah, so you want to, these are giving you a little bit more controls around who can collaborate.
Are all of these settings applied like when you go to invite somebody, or does it apply when you go to log in?
When you, depending on how you set these up, you may not even get the opportunity to invite anybody at the end of the day. Also, if you try, like the example of in Teams, for folks that are playing around with Teams, because Teams has underlying Office 365 groups, when you go into a Teams and you try to add a new member to the team and they're external and they don't allow it, you're going to get an error code. Now, if everything is wide open here and you're allowed to add guests, it'll just basically add them a guest behind the scenes. You won't know any of this, and they'll add them as a guest user and then send it off if you have the rights. But if you don't have the rights, you're going to get this. This isn't allowed by. You can't share this anything within this team because you don't have a guest user account. You can't add this as a guest user.
But if someone was shared and then you change the settings to make it more restrictive, would that block the next login attempt, or would that be a different control?
No, this is only the ability to invite. Once the user is actually in Azure ED and they're good. Right? This is just going to block net new, invites and acceptances to those domains across the board.
Good or bad?
Good or bad, yeah.
So to your question,
Yeah.
that's
that-
only for new invites.
going
That doesn't
forward,
shut everybody
yeah.
down if you've got a database.
Yeah. And so we're gonna get into who are all the people that you already invited, and then also constantly monitoring who are all the people that you're collaborating with external. That's one of the things that people are learning through.
So in SharePoint, we could also do the same thing, right? We could whitelist that certain domains.
Yes.
This one override the other one, or is it the way that we could?
This is one of the options within SharePoint. So when SharePoint has its own knobs that are duplicate, there's some duplicate aspects where SharePoint can go and do its own and not have to rely on B2B. But there's a setting within SharePoint that I'll highlight that says only allow people to collaborate in SharePoint that are part of your domain or your directory. So then that would enforce this. But that's only one of the options. SharePoint is much older and has more flexibility based on those security knobs I showed earlier. So yes, you can have SharePoint specific security knobs for external sharing that don't apply to this. But more and more, this is becoming more relevant because now you have to start thinking about, well, SharePoint's inside Teams and everyone's doing Teams-based collaboration. So now you do come back to this, right? Because you're going beyond just SharePoint. You're going actually to Teams, right? And Azure is a big one. I don't know if you guys cover Azure, but Azure, if you're going to have people working in Azure and you're a consultant, you're going to run into these as well.
To build on that a little bit, Scott, there are data classifications I have for SharePoint sites.
Yep.
Is there any integration with these controls and those classifications? So I can't enable external sharing for a site that's classified as secret, for example.
So that's where we're going. Okay, so this is going to be kind of a cool thing. I do have a cool scenario that I apply. Because guest users are a type, we're now starting to do conditional access. Everybody familiar with conditional access? A little bit. So we have conditional access controls that can enable you to say, if there's classified content, super highly confidential, and they're a guest user, don't allow access to that sensitive type of content. So and I'm going to highlight, I set up for a customer. They wanted to use Azure Active Directory, their Office 365, Azure. They were adding AWS to their environment. We can actually use Azure Active Directory to control AWS access. And I'm testing out kind of how that works. But I actually set up a conditional access rule that says any guest user that I've given access to my AWS environment, do an MFA. So this is kind of new in preview, I'll highlight it, but you can apply conditional access security controls to guest users. And then it's a lot of creative ways that I'm starting to hear people using it. And what we're working towards is basically highly classified employee only information. One could be done through AIP controls, but also what we're doing with AIP, just even in classification, is actually deny that user access. So that's where we're headed. It's a sensitivity. It's like sharing, but having a control that says, if I accidentally share the wrong thing, I want to be protected. And I want to have these things that kind of make me feel better, right? Fine, like the domains, whitelisting, blacklisting domains, having conditional access controls that say, yes, we do guest users, but we make sure that no guest user is ever going to touch and see this data. So you're in line with where we're going, right? Now, so I'm going to actually, in this deck, highlight those. So there it is. So target guest users with conditional access. So this is my environment where you're configuring a conditional access control for, what I'm doing here is basically, have AWS access. And for that application, I'm calling out all guest users that try to access this application. I'm going to force an MFA if you're a guest user. So that's going to kind of see. Now, they also have a thing here called directory roles that are built in. That's always on preview. But you could say if I'm a global admin, these are things where if you're a global admin or if you're a SharePoint admin, you can target those roles as well. But the all guest, a lot of customers now wanting to really secure who am I collaborating with And can I have that security to really target just at those external folks for sensitive information and going down that path. Then we talked a little bit about the Office 365 admin portal, B2B controls, and how we kind of surface those up. And this is us kind of surfacing what we talked about, right? From it's the same interface under the covers as Azure AD, but we're just surfacing them within the Office 365 console. Versus this is not where I typically live. That's if my colleagues were presenting, they would go through there. This kind of calls out with regard to controls that you could do with regard to tenant-wide. Sometimes you have tenant-wide controls in Office 365 and Office 365 groups, but then you could go per group. And I'll provide this with a PowerShell that if you're enterprise-wide, you may not want to allow members outside organization to access group content as a cost of tenant. But then specifically when you want to allow it, you could script it via PowerShell and then have some type of flow or control that you can enable authorization of the folks that have been trained that can actually share externally. So just a mechanism around how this all flows down to Office 365 a little bit. And then these are the SharePoint specific B2B controls. Highlighting here, where is it? So it allows sharing only with external users that already exist in your organization's directory is one that would be fully dependent on this. But then you could also establish the other different rules that are pre-B2B, but don't allow sharing outside your org or allow users to invite and share with authenticated external users and not even have a hook into this. So SharePoint has its own security model a little bit that you can pick, but you can tie it back to B2B. And B2B is kind of why I'm spending a lot of time on this. B2B is really where we think customers are going, is they want to have that centralized security control around who's seeing what, versus prior to this, SharePoint always had these external collaboration controls. So they're kind of evolving. I don't know what the future of these would be, but the one I'm kind of highlighting is the strategic importance of where B2B is and how you could use it across all your Office 365 apps, and, teams, and other services. So I'm going to highlight that. Users. So I'm actually going in my environment. These help me just kind of walk through the interface. When I mentioned B2B, when you get invited via B2B, I mentioned that you're going to accept that invite. And when you accept that invite, you're saying, I'm going to provide you some minimal PII information for you to be able to access my organization. Any organization that you go to, does anyone familiar with this look of this site from what I'm saying? Anybody recognize this? Got one? No? We are, just by your intake, this is the My Apps portal. So if you usually go to check my profile within Office 365, your little picture in Office 365, you'll go to this site. It's called we call it like the My Apps site, so where we kind of provide you visibility of all your applications. We are revamping it. So there is within this year, I think they're going to do a full facelift to make more people want to go here, but only a few people actually know what the site is. But when you go to this site, you can control the applications that you have access to from an Azure Active Directory perspective, the groups that you're a member of, so like Office 365 groups and security groups, and then your profile as to your password and some of your specific device information. So that's if you go to your click on your little picture within Office 365, you will go here. One thing that you may notice that if you've ever been invited to an organization, you're going to see all the different organizations you've been invited to, and you can go in here and actually, this is GDPR compliant. So a key thing, because it was PII, it's a modern service, Microsoft was driving to be one of the, first GDPR compliant cloud services. You can go into any company that's invited you and say, forget me. So you kind of have the right to be forgotten, but self-service. So the nice thing is that it's kind of built in that service that if you're a consultant and you're working with all these different companies and you're helping them kind of collaborate on teams, you may start seeing a lot of these, but after you're done, you may not want your personal information to be there anymore. So you basically say, forget me, and you leave those organizations. So there's a kind of highlight where those events at. So that allows you to be kind of like self-service control of where you are a guest with your identity within the Azure Active Directory. A new set of services that we've recently added is something called access reviews. Has anybody ever heard of access reviews at all? No? So what access reviews do is allow you to, there's two kind of functionality here. Access reviews in terms of use that are built into the service. So one, access reviews allow you, they're kind of an extension of Office 365 extension rules or time-bound rules where you can, when you create an Office 365 group, you could put a time restriction on there where it's a time to live, and you can restrict that. Well, this goes beyond that functionality where you can either on a time-bound, so monthly or yearly, have an access review on a group or on external users within your environment to confirm that they should still be basically external guest users within your environment. And then you identify owners who have to, on a whatever time frame you decide, want to confirm that those users are still valid users to remain within your directory. If they go in, and then now there's new automation that if nobody either updates it and says remove, and they don't meet the time restrictions that on a monthly or yearly basis you're having people check, they'll automatically be removed from your directory. So there's these basically provide you automatic cleanup, automatic kind of control as to who's being invited into your environment, and having some attestation as to yes, they should still be able to be part of your directory. Question?
Where, to whom do they go if you set that up?
You pick. So well, two aspects. If it's just an access review based on a user, it's gonna you can pick who the user. If it's a group, it's gonna be the group owner. So you can do access reviews on groups. You can provide you can create dynamic groups within Azure AD to dynamically collect all guest users. And then you can identify an owner of the group, or you can actually pick a person to actually have the approval. Like maybe it's a security person within your org.
So if it's an external user and 5 different SharePoint sites, that user is gonna go to, you could say, go to all 5 different owners of the sites and confirm that this person is still a user in that site?
Actually, that's the whole purpose of access reviews. Yeah. So you have
But that will tell you
who's gone in and
whom it's
accepted.
gonna go, this external user, we're gonna send a notice to that owner to say confirm or,
Yes.
okay.
And then if that person doesn't accept, it doesn't review, you can have a rule that automatically removes them or sends an alert. So you decide on what it does. But it gives you a nice audit control mechanism for what you're still talking about.
That's available now?
That's available now. The other thing that's in there is terms of use. So terms of use is a feature. This actually could, if you go old school, if you remember login screens, when in Active Directory you prompt it up and you say user. Announcement for CEO. Terms of use basically force a message on logon. It's a logon message, and it uses conditional access behind the scenes to say if you're once a year external users, you can point at terms of use at all external users and say click here to accept the terms that if you're an external user of my company, you agree to these terms. And if you don't get access. And then you track it and audit that people are doing it. You could also do that for like SOX compliance or just get people. Also, you could say emergency. It's a new word, like, you say, hey, put in terms of use and don't allow anybody to get access to Office 365 until they actually read that emergency message. So it's another mechanism that you have control. These do require some of the premium licensing, Azure AD premium licensing, which would be included in your EMS, usually EMS licenses. But these are really powerful too. If you know,
It's only EMS 5.
EMS 5, yeah. So these are some of the more
We can
premium
check.
services, yes. The other scenario, this is the big one that M&A scenarios are asking for. This is in private preview. Has anyone ever heard of the concept of friendly tenants? No? So that whole consent, the consent message that I shared earlier, if you're an M&A and you have a friendly tenant, like you conglomerate and then owned entity, we're establishing something called admin consent for guest access that allows you to identify a partner organization and establish them as a trusted organization. It's almost, if you know Active Directory trust, it's kind of start and establishing, we're going in that direction a little bit. And then consent on behalf of my users so they don't get prompted for those consents, because you trust, you don't have to have that legal consent if the company is all one company. So big area to basically start to allow multiple tenants. This could be M&A, various different scenarios of where this go, but we're trying to remove the friction from collaboration for very strategic tenants across the board.
Are they still classified as guests or external users?
Yes.
Like for the purposes of the rest of the software, right? Like,
Yes.
okay.
Yep. Because you're usually going to have one user with a mailbox, say in headquarters, but they have to get like access to a ServiceNow instance. So you could still enable those users to have, basically access to those. They already have one sign-in. Because if you didn't do that, you're just trying to simplify kind of that user experience around getting access to applications or data at the end of the day that is outside their tenant. So that this is trying to remove that friction. It's really it's private preview. So it's still early days, but this is, if you look at user voice, #1 user voice request by customers to enable this. I'm going to go into this with regard to the demo, but this is underlying the technical underlying kind of components. This is on the site here that actually shows B2B user properties, but it really kind of highlights what's going on behind the scenes between a tenant that you're a full member, and we're talking about user type. And I liked it because you get a visual representation of now you get invited to another tenant, say Microsoft invites you, you're actually a B2B user. And then the different ways with regard to how different existing accounts within that tenant that's invited to you basically are going to communicate with that guest account. So you have obviously cloud only accounts, on-prem accounts that are basically replicating up, home to an external directory. So B2B, so external Azure AD is what we've been kind of focusing on, that I'll show you. The other scenario is Microsoft accounts. So this is a good one that kind of highlights a Microsoft account is automatically trusted. So an MSA, a Hotmail, a Live account, you can invite those. You can also decide to block those. The other scenario I'm going to show you is Gmail. Gmail was just added as you could add Gmail as a trusted account. That's new. But this gives you nice visibility as to kind of what's the under the hood look like when you're invited as a guest user, and what are those components. I think that's. And I have some references outside of today around audit. So with the Microsoft Graph, you can go to this link and query if you have the right rights, minimum rights around invitation status, as well as unredeemed users in your tenant. And then you can clean them up or kind of monitor that. And then have some resources with regard to a lot of the components that we kind of flew through today. But these kind of give you some, these are direct links, and I'll provide this to David and team so you guys have access to the deck. So I'm just going to go to Azure Active Directory here, and that's in that test tenant. So this is under the hood. If you have access to the console, Azure Active Directory, and this is the new tile that they've added from an administrative perspective, called organizational relationships. These are where we're kind of starting to think through. These are all the user types, our guests that I've invited, going across the board. You'll see from an identity provider perspective, the new one here is like Google. So I can go into Google, add, as long as you have a Google account, you have to establish a trust with the Google, basically federating with the Google service. And then you basically allow Google to be a trusted service provider, just like Live or Outlook.com, if you wanted to enable that. So that now you can invite Google accounts to B2B, and it would guarantee that it is that user from Google that's accepting that invite. That's relatively new that they've added.
So that means that a guest that's invited by a Gmail account can log on with their Google credentials.
Yep.
To get access?
To get access to your SharePoint site, to your Teams. The settings, so this one, organizational relationships, we went through those settings. Terms of use is the area where you can actually create new terms. So when you create those terms of use, Azure Stack, welcome to the MTC, I can identify when you assign the terms of use to users. You can assign the terms of use to just your guest users, and then you can monitor who accepted or declined, and they're not going to get access if they don't accept. So everybody should ultimately accept at the end of the day. And then access reviews is the new space here. And then when you go into create access reviews, I have a couple of pre-created. So here's an example of one that I created last night, EXP guest reviews. And I can come in, identify, the status of who's reviewed that access. I can identify the reviewers. So I have this Azure Stack account that's actually the reviewer of the folks that need to be accessed. And then these are some of the scenarios around mail notifications, reminders. So these, as the date gets closer that I set, will be notified, require reason for extending the approval, identify the start and end date, and then kind of auto-apply results resource and recommendations. So these are ways that you kind of, and then you have a full audit log as to who's been approved and kind of, been working through that. Who's been working through that authorization. So you have a full audit log as to those reviews. It might be interesting. So if I do a new access review, you can see example access review, and then you could identify your own start date. You could do one time, or you could do weekly, quarterly, or like an annual type review. Identify what's the duration, and then end date. users, so members of a group. And then here's the scenario where you get into like guest users only for everyone. You select the actual group that you want to apply this to. And then here's where you go into, there's actually different programs you can establish from a program perspective, but upon completion scenarios is should reviewer not approve for some reason because they just didn't meet the deadline, automatically remove access, approve or automatically approve access. I don't know why you would want to do that, or take recommendations. There's a recommended approach within the service. We'll kind of clean it up for you. So you're flexible on automatically kind of keeping these groups clean, and then advanced settings these are some of the notifications. So recommendations require reason for approval. So this gives you that basically ability to manage those different sensitive users or sensitive apps within the environment.
So if you do the remove access, what exactly does that do? Does it just like kind of hold on the access, or does it get rid of the user?
It, I believe it removes the user. So it removes all access and the user. Yeah. Want to get that user out of there across the board. So this is a way that gives you programmatic attestation of who's being invited and removed on a regular basis out of your environment. Now, if I go to this user account and I go to view account, I'm going to go to that site that I talked about earlier that has the app portal, and there's my my profile, and then here's my organizations that I've been invited to, and then if I have a test tenant, test MTC boss. So in order to remove myself from that test tenant, I have to actually log in to that test tenant. So now if you see up here, I have my Azure Stack account under the test MTC boss location. And then if I go to my profile, and then now I can click leave organization, and then see if I leave that organization, I'll no longer have access to any of their applications or data. And then you can contact, or backups, things like that. You can contact them for any type of compliance type stuff.
So I don't know the answer to this, maybe somebody else does, but I've never actually had to remove an external user from SharePoint yet. But does it show, when you do that and you go and you intentionally get them out of the whole system, does it show in the history, in the SharePoint site, anywhere that, like, it shows withdrawn, if you withdrawn an invitation, it'll tell the owner of the site the history of all the external users you've invited in that stuff. If you remove them, does all of that go away? Can the SharePoint site owner go in and say, oh, John can't get on because John's been removed from the system, let me call IT?
It depends. Remember that SharePoint configuration. If you have SharePoint configured to only rely on B2B, the rule set that said, I will only allow external collaboration in SharePoint for users that are in my directory, then that will work. If you've gone through some other options in SharePoint that doesn't use B2B, well then that I don't know. That's outside. That's going to be a SharePoint specific audit log because it's not using B2B. So SharePoint, as I mentioned, has two mechanisms. It's a little confusing. That's why. But we're trying to get most customers to go, especially with Teams, because Teams will definitely have to use this if you're doing Teams in SharePoint. So this is the strategic way. But in your case, it depends. If SharePoint is configured to use B2B, then it would have an audit trail, because behind the scenes in that links that I provided, it has the Microsoft Graph, it has Azure AD Audit, and you have a whole audit control as to who changed what in terms of that environment. That's what Access Reviews does. If you're not using B2B and you're using SharePoint native, external sharing, that would be up to SharePoint to provide that visibility.
Yeah, so just like in SharePoint, if you delete a user from AD, the site owner would have no clue that that user was removed. That wouldn't be logged anywhere because it's not making a change within the SharePoint object. It's outside of SharePoint. So along the same lines, you wouldn't see a trail that this external user was removed from your directory. But if you invite from within SharePoint and then SharePoint, you withdraw it, then that's still contained inside that site.
Is this considered a withdrawal?
No, this is the same thing like you delete another user.
The thing that you may have in terms of audit trail is the Azure Active Directory audit log. So there's an audit log, not in SharePoint, but in Azure AD. And Azure AD actually tracks what rights you have. So that's where you'll probably have a better chance at showing and showing basically any type of audit as to what that user that got deleted had access to. That's where you want to look. Question?
Scott, are there any major differences between communication sites which aren't driven by Office 365 groups versus team sites in terms of external sharing?
Versus team. What I was thinking, Microsoft Teams, team sites and communication sites. Those are just core SharePoint. I don't think there's any difference in terms of the security.
The difference is that team sites are driven by Office 365 group membership.
Oh, I'm sorry, Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams.
No,
versus.
I'm talking about SharePoint team sites.
Oh, SharePoint Teams sites. Oh, okay.
Right? You set up an Office 365 group, you get a team site, you get a Yammer channel.
Can you create a SharePoint Teams site without an Office 365 group?
Yes, classic.
Classic.
Even
Not a
modern.
modern.
You can create a modern one that's not attached.
Okay.
But Mike, to answer your question, when you go to share a user inside SharePoint, you have the drop down that says, do I want to share this with everyone
Make them
inside my
member groups
organization?
or, yeah.
Exactly. So if you do within my organization, that's going to rely on Azure AD, so these settings will apply. If you send like an anonymous link or an external user directly,
Yeah.
then it'll be going the other route.
Right, the SharePoint only.
Right. So in the communication site, if you say anyone within my organization, then it would follow you.
Right, that kind of everybody group, everyone except external users.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah, that's why I like this slide and, that it's the control layers. Sometimes SharePoint has its own knobs over here versus Office groups. And it's a little confusing because you have different options. What we're strategically going to though is trying to get more and more folks to move to this because now you have a central security control that's more expandable.
I can share an experience with Microsoft. So we had a problem with our Microsoft partners. So one of our clients, we had this issue that a user shared with a group, a SharePoint group, not an Office 365 group. So I spent a month or so with Microsoft support. So we found out at the end of the day that if we create all the SharePoint groups, now the security and compliance module, the audit report and all that, they cannot basically track SharePoint groups. So these are like a bunch of codes and they cannot basically.
Oh, the actual native SharePoint groups. So it's much better to actually go off of Azure AD, either Azure AD security groups or Office 365 groups. Yeah, and as consultants, you helping customers navigate this, you'll be priceless because so many customers are coming in very confused. And we have to explain, kind of get them to try to understand this. They and end users don't know any of this stuff. They just want to click on accept and just get access to the document. They don't care how this happens. But if you do this in a clean manner, now you're providing nice audit controls, seamless. We're working towards frictionless. That's the term I hear a lot of product people do is, things that I was showing, the things that are showing in preview, they're trying to make this much more seamless so that you can enable the sharing and collaboration in a better way. But hopefully what I've walked through with you is does it help to kind of just highlight those B2B controls? I've kind of highlighted the last 3 months of a lot of the new capabilities to tackle a lot of the pain points that customers have been dealing with. But I guess the takeaway from this discussion is really starting to help your thought process around how you advise either yourselves or other customers around how they collaborate externally. This is definitely where things are going. And the maturity is increasing where from a security perspective, there's a standards board called CIS benchmarks that have put out something called CIS benchmarks for Azure, and all of this is covered. This is all covered basically on security best practices. Everything I just talked to kind of walks through, how to best configure these. It's just I found a lot of customers haven't had a chance to look at those recommendations and go in their environments and properly apply security.
Who wrote that? Is that Microsoft written or?
No, it's CIS benchmarks is written by security community, DoD folks, like this, basically a security community. So if you go and look up CIS benchmarks, I think there's a CIS benchmarks for Office 365. So if you go, this is I think there was a write-up for that. So Center for Internet Security, they have the different benchmarks. I thought there was
Next one.
so
Third one,
what's that?
Third one.
third result.
Oh, there, right here. There you go. Office 365 Exchange Online. So yeah, it's benchmark settings, and then there's Azure. This one came out. Azure CIS for security.
Scott, is this the new Chromium-based Edge that you're showing us
On the Edge? Oh, no. No, it could be. I just got updated. This is actually Chrome.
No,
Yeah, so download, so securing Microsoft Azure, even though it says Azure, it's, there's Office 365 in here. When you download it, it's benchmark. It basically just goes through everything I just walked you guys through in terms of Azure Foundations. So you can sign up and browse it. But then if you go to find that page, you do Azure D extended, Azure D, users. Ensure that there are no guest users listed, guest users only. So it's going to go through specific guidance around turning off all the things I just told you to do. So it's not just Scott saying it, it's Center for Internet Security. And now you believe me. I'm used to, I've been in Microsoft 15 years, that no one believes anything until they walk out there and then they go, yeah, okay, you're right. You're telling the truth. I think like, here's a non-partial group that tells you what to do. And they have all, we go through the references of everything I provided. So I'll provide this link as well. Any other questions? So the things you do is go to, if you haven't done it before, last thing is if you have access to an Office 365 environment, go into, you can play around with just getting familiar with inviting guest users. If you have the rights, so that, you go in here, if you have that right, you're gonna go new guest user. You're gonna just plug in the email and invite and then send it away, and you do some testing on the fly. If you've never done B2B, so just get familiar with it. Question?
one of my clients recently asked me, because they saw an external user, they didn't know who it was, or what they had access to, or who could even add it. Is there a report or dashboard in here anywhere that can be used to backtrace from a single user? What does this user have access to?
Backtrace to the user, what they have access to, potentially yes, because you can go to.
I know I can see what groups they're a member of, but if they shared like individual files or folders.
The sharing, yeah, so this would be like an example of a guest user.
Yeah.
But you're just going to be able to see, applications. If they have access to any applications that you've shared, some groups, and by being part of the groups, these would be Office 365 groups and security groups.
Yeah.
We also, if they're in these groups, we're gonna rely on the API, security API for logging on changes to groups and activities. We'll also have login information. So we'll provide when they've logged in, and to what applications. And so whether they've logged in this year, went online, and what they've been doing. All that data is captured inside the Azure Active Directory log and API set. So that's one area you would want to potentially check out and be able to do some.
And is there a limit to how far back that log goes?
90 days. So that log is 90 days. I heard recently that Office 365 is going to a year potentially in terms of logging. Have you guys heard anything like that? Have you? Yeah.
I think so.
I think it's going to a year. Customers are asking for a year. But by default, most things are 90 days in terms of logs that you can investigate. Or you could store things in like log analytics. Like you can store it for longer beyond the 90 days. You can point all those logs to a log analytics workspace, or you may have a SIM that you're sucking in. A lot of the SIMs, security SIMs, basically have APIs that just pull all that log information into your security tools. They like to keep it for a year or two. So a lot of your security people like to grab all the details on what security groups, all that type of stuff.
I think there's two endpoints for the logging API, right? You get 30 days for one of them, and if you want more than 30, you have to do the second API.
Second API input.
Yes, for some reason I think there's anyone else seen this?
Yeah, Power BI has a built-in one that goes against that. It's 30. I think it's a 30-day view automatically. But then the full log, I think, is 90 days. Yeah, outside like Power BI. So Power BI may be tapping into that 30-day API. They know for 90 days they usually provide 90 days of a lot of things. But that's where. So auto logs. These are. Good audit logs for this, but you could also look at logs per user potentially. What's that?
First one to look at.
Yeah, logs and stuff like that. So it'd be awesome. Cool security people like to play with that.
That's found the IT pro.
Awesome. Love it.
So another thing is that comes into my space, where we love to say the relationship with Azure. So I have customers that do AWS. I'm just kind of highlighting now I can so if I have Chase, who's an external user, want to provide access to my AWS, I can. I can just do Azure. So I could say I give contributor access and user give root access. This is one of my security personas that we use for demos. But you can actually share Azure resources with those guest users. So the reason why that's kind of scenario is contractors being invited into the environment, doing some contracting work. The beauty is that you don't potentially have to create an on-prem AD or any type of identity. You just invite that user, give them the access, and then once their access is done, you can get rid of them and you're not managing another account internally. So you can provide access to Azure resources. The other scenario with external users is 5-to-1 licensing benefit. So if you have EMS or if you have customers with EMS, for every one licensed user, you can invite 5 users and apply MFA. So if I wanted to force the guest user to use my MFA, so I'm relying that the guest user, their company is going to authenticate them and maintain their account. But then if I still don't trust them, I can force them to register for my MFA in my company and do a second MFA when they're logging into my data. So you can double MFA. I don't know who cares, but a lot of people don't know we give the 5-to-1. So if you have like 1,000 EMS licenses, you can invite up to 5,000 guests, no additional cost, and apply MFA. So that's pretty much it. And any other questions? We're all gonna start sharing, inviting each other's tenants. stuff like that.
Start cleaning up our shares.
Start cleaning up your shares. Yep.
Start knowing who we're sharing with.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, realize,
Been sharing for years, now I know how to clean it up.
now you know where to go. Azure AD and organizational relationships. These are all the people. There are lots of people we're collaborating with in our fake environment. I'm not going to show you our Microsoft. Anybody do B2B with Microsoft? No? So David, you don't do it? Huh?
We're going to.
You're going to? Fast Track. Does anybody know Fast Track? So they're in Office 365. I've been seeing them ask the customer to create a team site or the Microsoft Teams external and invite them to the Teams. So they're asking the customer to invite the Microsoft employee as a B2B, and then they help them with the onboarding type stuff. Same concept. You could tell your customer, say, hey, let me help you. I'm doing that with Azure as well. Say, hey, create a team. You know, also if they're not Teams, you know, Slack, whatever, but you want to get in there and start collaborating with them. This is a mechanism that you would ask, bring me in. Let me help you out. We're definitely seeing that a lot. Cool. All set?
All right.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that.
Cool. Thank you very much. All right, great. Sweet. So we want to share some upcoming community events. Global Azure Bootcamp. Did you do this on purpose? You talked about
Azure.
No one will know. So there's an Azure Bootcamp coming up. It's hosted down at MIT. There's a link for it. That's coming up in a couple weeks. SharePoint conference. Who's going to SharePoint conference? Wow, one. You don't seem very happy about it. No, you don't want to go?
No, I do want to go. It's just funding iffy.
Okay, pain to get, yeah. So that's coming up in May. We'll try to align a speaker after that to give us all the highlights and all that stuff, if we can find somebody. And then SBA TechCon is coming up in August. Who's going to that? It's kind of far out. I'll be on that too. We will have tickets to raffle off, hopefully next session for that. We're one of their sponsors for the event, so they give us tickets. Great. Are there any other community events you would want to share? Anything else going on in the Boston area that people would want to know? Dimitri?
I don't know, so Christine online is mentioning SharePoint Saturday in New York City is coming up at the end of July.
Oh, excellent.
And Philly's end of June.
Excellent. Anything else? Cool. Pretty fades. So weird load for a screen. So there's no title on that slide. These are some of the other user groups around town that we kind of watch and share their events as they come up. So feel free to check them out if there's a focus area that you're interested in. We're being recorded, so I'm not saying anything else. Coming up, we have no idea. So we will get a speaker. I'm quite confident that we will find somebody. But if you're interested,
my team members.
yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. If you can refer me, push
I'll put some
Paul.
pressure on.
I've been trying to get Paul to speak for a while. We will aim to host it here again. And yeah, if any of you are interested or know somebody who might be interested in sharing, so it is low pressure. I mean, Scott did a fantastic job. You don't have to be an excellent speaker to speak up there. We just want to hear what's in your head. That's what we want. All that wonderful thought knowledge. So, so let us know if you're interested. Again, it'll be at Burlington. The month after that, I'm trying to get to the garage again down in Cambridge, which is a great space. It's a little harder to get into. It is a little hard to get into.
It's worth it. It's worth it if you incorporate like drinks afterward. They have great
We
bars.
go out for drinks afterwards. We don't provide drinks afterwards. Great bars over there. Yes, absolutely.
Thursdays, if you haven't heard about it, what do you do on Thursdays? Venture Cafe is free drinks.
Where? Huh?
Yeah, look up Boston Venture Cafe or Cambridge. And the Venture Cafe is startup community. Everybody funded by the city of Boston, Thursday afternoons, free drinks.
City of Boston's gonna buy me free
Yeah,
drinks?
city of Boston.
Big old networking event to track.
Thomas Benito.
Sweet.
It's Thomas Benito.
So we want to open up the time for a little bit for anybody to ask any general questions. We have a lot of experts in the room. We have a lot of people with questions in the room. So feel free one at a time to throw out questions, issues, anything you're facing. Dimitri?
So I'm not sure if anyone else has seen this problem, but one of our clients had an interesting challenge about a week ago, where if they went to a list or library settings and look at the versions, it would say it was gonna retain 500 versions. Didn't matter if you change that to 50,000, 0 to 1 to 100, the interface would always show 500. Apparently, it was a global problem that was corrected as of about a day ago. But for the last week, the correct versions were still being set behind the scenes, but the page would always show 500 no matter what you set it to.
I got one that's got us stumped. Does anyone ever have a bug where when you load a page, say the home page on a SharePoint intranet, the sweet bar, the word SharePoint goes away, logo goes away, it just has the word sites, and then it only shows OneDrive and sites, doesn't show all your other Office 365 license things. It's something in how the sweet bar loads, and we can't figure out what's interfering with it. As soon as you put on Fiddler, it stops happening. We literally have no way to recreate this for 4 months. It's been escalated with Microsoft. I was just curious if anybody else has seen that.
We've seen some weird things happen if you have like Netscope or other like internet filtering software installed.
We do it then. But that makes a lot of weird things happen, right?
I'm not saying Netscope causes this, but we've seen some strange things.
Anything in the middle creates this issue, right?
And,
Okay.
and Fiddler actually goes around a lot of those because they create their own tunnel.
Yeah.
Sometimes Fiddler is not the best representation of
Yeah.
your Tor browser.
Anybody use Wunderlist? Yeah. Highly recommend jumping to do.
Yeah, I moved.
I just made that jump.
Love
It
it.
is fantastic.
How many, I know it's good on Microsoft person, how many negative videos and like everyone's so negative on
How to do, yeah. No, they just made recent updates that make it a lot more attractive.
Flagged emails.
Flagged emails show up
Flagged emails is
automatically.
cool.
I mean, it's not just like a folder that says flagged emails. These are actual tasks that you can move around to other folders and organize your flagged emails as tasks.
So when are they gonna bring back the planner integration?
They
Because
should not-
I've been on To Do for a long time.
Yeah.
And they didn't have planner integration, and then they did. And for a while, they had planner integration. I actually announced it at one
Yeah.
of these groups. And then I was made to look like a fool because they removed it.
Yeah.
They just brought it back, Mike.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, they just
this-
bring it back?
This week.
Really?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It just jumped in
I
this
was
week.
gonna
I
say,
hadn't
oh my
seen it.
goodness.
That's exciting.
Well,
Cool.
All right, so it's Zach. Don't count on it.
Yeah, so check out To Do. I have a praiseworthy blog post that explains why I love To Do so much as well on my blog.
I will put a plug in for Build is coming up. Microsoft Build, you're gonna see a lot of cool things like that Microsoft's working on. But one of, not saying this is gonna be in there, but To Do and Wunderlist and Alexa is really cool. So you can go, hey Alexa, add milk to my grocery list.
Mhm.
And if you have it connected, it will add it to your to-do list. So check.
Oh, that's cool.
It's really nice. They're making it easier and easier
That's
to do that type of stuff.
Because Alexa's native list is terrible.
Yeah.
You have one other thing? I don't know if Dave Feldman talked about it last week or or last meeting, if it had come out. But if anybody uses the PNP libraries from Microsoft, the patterns and practices, the multilingual capabilities for modern intranets has been released to PNP.
Excellent.
So that's available for people who want to do ML in a way that's going to be relatively well aligned with Microsoft when Microsoft brings it out, which we think is later this year, probably, is what they've talked about.
Client asks about that right now.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
feel free to,
Sweet.
ask Dave, it's out there. I think it has gotten out to PNP. If not, it will be soon.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Right. You waiting?
So I've got just a glitch that I've noticed with, I think it's related to the CSS files related to hub site navigation. I've got an intranet that I've deployed for a client, and we're actually color coding our hubs. So we actually have 5 different hubs, and as you go from one to the next, you're color coded, which doesn't work at all because a lot of times the CSS is not loaded properly. So it'll stay the color of the previous page that it was on.
Oh, weird.
Sometimes simply, or frequently, simply hitting refresh brings up the proper color.
Right.
Which is what leads me to believe that it's some sort of a CSS caching issue.
Right.
But I've been seeing that a lot, and that's really frustrating because when it works, it's beautiful. It's really elegant.
But, no idea. Dimitri?
I don't know, we have, I take it over with Microsoft now, and we can reproduce this next issue across multiple tenants. So I want to throw it out there if anyone else has seen this or has a fix for it. But if you have a group connected SharePoint modern team site, and you're a SharePoint admin, site collection admin for that site, or you're a global admin, and you try to delete that site collection from within itself, you get either an access denied or something went wrong message. If you try to delete it from central admin, it goes through just fine. But within the site, like site settings, delete the site, just does not work.
So this is a SharePoint team site with a group.
So it's a modern team set that you would create.
Right.
And we try this against multiple tenants, including a few prod tenants, all having the same problem, just different variations of it. Cool. I don't know, maybe we're doing something wrong, but one.
Give it a try. Have you all received the new office icons on Windows? Yep. Yeah.
You're excited, right?
Let me tell you how much end users love that change. They'll get used to it though, it's fine. Anyway.
Just in time for it to change again.
So again, a huge thanks to Turn Digital for sponsoring tonight, providing the browser. Thank you to all of our past sponsors, which that slide is right here, wrong order. If you are interested in sponsoring or know somebody who might be interested, we are always looking for sponsors. These things don't run themselves, and it does cost money. So big thanks to Turn Digital, all of our other sponsors, and now on to the money. The raffle.
The raffle.
So we have 3 $25 gift cards.